4, 3, 2, 1. Bingo, bango, bongo. Hello, Gustaf. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. I'm in my hometown, as most people. I work from Uppsala in Sweden today, since it's close to impossible to go to my office in Stockholm. But it's fine working from home as well.
Yeah, I must say I'm getting used to this routine now. To be honest with you, so Gustaf, today we are discussing the Swedish online gambling regulation. And Gustaf, you're the General Secretary of BOS. Can you introduce a little bit us about BOS, what you do, and who you are, first of all, foremost?
Well, we are a traditional trade association, and we represent both operators and suppliers in Sweden. And we've been operating since 2012, long before the famous licensing system in Sweden. And we represent approximately 20 operators and suppliers. All of our operators obviously have a Swedish license. That's mandatory for anyone who wants to be a member of BOS. Our suppliers are not demanded that since there are in fact no B2B licenses in Sweden, at least not yet. And we advocate in just about anything in the interest of our members. And that varies, of course, from time to time, what's on the agenda, so to speak.
Great. So Gustaf, this hasn't escaped anyone in the online gaming world, obviously, that the last year and a half or so after the new year in 2019, the Swedish gaming regulation came into play. Operators were kind of excited. Finally, there was a strict regulation in place to follow and to operate, legally in Sweden. But since then, a lot of things have happened, and right now there's obviously a lot of mistrust against the regulation, and a lot of things that happen against these regulated operators. Can you talk a little bit about what was the intention of the regulation and where did things start go wrong?
I think the intention with the regulation to introduce a licensing system in Sweden, there were a couple of reasons for that. One reason was, one shall remember this, that the European Commission actually threatened to sue Sweden at the Court of Justice in Luxembourg due to infringement of EU law. And the EU Commission decided in the autumn of 2015, if I recall this correctly, to sue Sweden due to infringement. To an infringement case. The other and perhaps even more important reason was the lousy channelization in Sweden. When it came to online gambling, the system that the monopoly system that the government offered to Swedish punters didn't even collect half of the punters. So we had actually a channelization below 50% in Sweden, and the punters they prefer to be elsewhere, almost anywhere, but within the system that was offered by the state of Sweden at that time. So for that reason, the government and Minister Ardalan Shekarabi took an initiative to re-regulate the Swedish market with the idea to offer a level playing field for all operators that complied to a harsh regulation, but nevertheless a regulation that at least verbally from the government should offer equal terms for each and every one. So that was the start of everything. And then at the at the start of the new licensing system in January 2019, it started quite well actually. When you look at the channelization figures, I believe that the channelization was almost best in class compared to other European jurisdictions. I believe that we have no public numbers, but I believe that we were quite close to the UK channelization of approximately 95% or so. And I shall also say simultaneously, and it comes as no surprise, the advertisement in the spring of 2019 was massive. And this caused a lot of frustration among many people, but among politicians in particular. And the minister in charge, Mr. Ardalan Shekarabi, decided to take a number of measures specifically targeted to the online industry. And that has continued ever since. So we've seen that for a year and a half now. And as a consequence of that, we have also seen the channelization numbers drop significantly. So we started with, well, not 100% channelization, that's impossible for a democracy, but with very high channelization figures. And then, well, at spring of 2019, later on in the spring, the Swedish Gambling Authority presented a channelization estimate of 91%. Then at the autumn of 2019, it had dropped to approximately 85%. And now we've received figures from consultancy firm Copenhagen Economics that suggest that the channelization in Sweden right now is probably approximately 85 at the most. But one shall also bear in mind that that includes all the gambling verticals, also including horse trotting, for example, that is extremely popular in Sweden, and it also is more or less a monopoly, channelizing approximately 98% of the punters, whereas at the same time, some other gambling verticals like online casino are heavily suffering from very low channelization numbers. Copenhagen Economics believe that the channelization when it comes to online casino is 75% today. So every fourth Swedish krona when it comes to online casino is leaking out of the system already. And unfortunately, the government and the minister in charge doesn't seem to be worried about that channelization. We as well as Swedish authorities have presented those disturbing numbers to the government over and over again. But what we hear is kind of sunny stories from the government that there's not really a problem. The channelization is perfect and everything is going well when it comes to channelization. And the government has taken a number of initiatives that we know for sure will have a negative impact on the channelization. So it is quite a tricky situation. We are not at this moment back to the numbers that we had prior to the re-regulation, but we are on a path that eventually will lead us to a situation where we will be back on where we started 1 and a year ago. Mm. And of course, it's my task and my members' task to do whatever we can to protect the licensing system and protect the channelization. But we cannot do that should the punters leave, because what's the point for a gambling company to apply for a license, comply with the regulation, pay Swedish tax, etc., if the punters have already gone elsewhere?
Yeah, and this is such a hot potato now, and I hear what you're saying. There was even stricter regulation now during the start of the COVID-19 crisis and so forth. And what would you say? Like how close right now would you say that the punters are to actually withdraw from the markets? Like where is that turning point? So to say, where does it go too far?
Well, as I began with, we already have a 25% leakage. That's the revenue, not the number of human beings that are leaking out of the system. So we can be quite certain that high volume punters have more or less already left the licensing system.
Mm-hmm.
And that
sorry, I rephrased the question a bit. I asked it wrong. Not punters. When will the operators withdraw from the licensing system? When do they say that they have had enough?
It's a very good question. I do not know, is my honest reply. But I assume, as a qualified guess, that if you are a niche operator, perhaps you only operate on the online casino vertical, and you are perhaps quite small, and you can observe that according to Swedish legislation, it's actually not illegal to accept Swedish customers as long as you don't use the Swedish language and as long as you do not use the Swedish currency. Then I believe it's quite tempting to actually abandon the licensing system, because after all, you can operate from anywhere outside Sweden, and you can actually operate and be compliant with Swedish legislation without a Swedish license. And I mean, what's the purpose of having a Swedish license? What's the purpose of paying the tax and be compliant? And when everything you receive from the Swedish government is endless complaints and so it is a tricky question.
Yeah.
But just to also, I really want to try to give you an estimate on when the operators are leaving. Well, so far we've only seen one or two operators leaving the market. I believe that 75% is not sustainable, and I expect the channelization to drop further. One shall bear in mind that the suggested new measures from the government, they haven't been
implemented.
They are not operated as we speak.
It's still up to debate, right? If I understand it correctly.
They shall be implemented July the 2nd. If I don't recall this, if I recall this correct, and they will further push the punters away, and we will probably see a much lower channelization in the autumn of this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of operators in fact leave the licensing market by the autumn of this year. I would expect those operators to be niche operators and not the big elephants in the room, but rather small ones.
Yeah. So let's say that you are Ardalan Shekarabi, now the minister who is in charge of the licensing system. So from his perspective, obviously he is answering to his voters, and as you mentioned earlier, a big part of this problem is the fact that the question itself is so infected in the Swedish kind of culture at the moment due to this like massive aggressive marketing that we saw last year. So from his perspective, kind of whenever he restricts the online gaming world, like that is obviously scoring political points, which is what he lives and dies of, so to say. And it's easy points to score. And it's not really that the online gaming companies have a lot of empathy from the general public. So how do you create a voice to the minister, and how do you actually reach through with this message and kind of go against this easy political points that he is trying to score?
It is, of course, a difficult task. And one reason why it is so difficult is that the kind of, well, I believe that we are, as industry are often extremely focused on facts. Yeah. We can produce all kind of fact-based material regarding customer protection, channelization, etc., etc. But the industry that we work within is emotionally driven.
Yes.
And you are absolutely right that whenever the minister criticizes the industry, he scores points in a public arena. Well, to begin with, I believe that we do have a lesson here to learn within the industry, that we must always work with our reputation, and we must do a lot to improve the reputation of the industry. But since the motive from the minister, I agree with you, is perhaps not so much about customer protection at the bottom line, and perhaps not so much about the well-being of the regulation, but rather that he receives a lot of positive reactions whenever he criticizes the industry. I believe that we somehow must remind the government and him about the consequences of doing so. And the consequence is that, well, the punters leave. And if the punters leave, then the operators leave. And a licensing system without punters and without license holders is not a licensing system. And I believe that obviously it would hurt. It would hurt Sweden. It would hurt customer protection. It would hurt also punters without a gambling problem. It would definitely hurt the operators. Tax income would drop, etc., etc. So what we are trying to do is, of course, we are communicating all that advocacy, but we are also are in a dialogue with people that hopefully have a perhaps even better capacity when it comes to gaining the government's and the minister's interest. Party members of the minister, to give you one example. But it is indeed a tricky thing to achieve.
Yeah, and I mean this is the root of the issue. I would assume that I mean the fact of the matter that the question is so infected in the Swedish society. Do you think that, or perhaps this is also something you're working on in parallel to the lobbying, to also kind of change the image of the gaming organizations in Sweden? Is that something you're also looking into?
Yes, but we always focus on being good rather than how we communicate the industry. When we have to make a decision, we always focus on the real world rather than the world that is perhaps perceived. But of course, reputation is a must. Shall we survive as industry? Because if you have a bad reputation, and I believe that what we've seen lately is an example of that. If you have a bad reputation, the political risk increases. So that is one of many reasons why we must do something about the reputation. And one, if I just may add, it is a particular reason why it's so tricky to work with the reputation is that the operators in Sweden actually work with quite different terms. For example, we have a state-owned operator that half of its business comes from monopoly gambling. And quite often their interest is not the same as if you are a privately owned casino operator. For example, the state-owned operator has suggested that marketing online casinos should be prohibited. Well, the advocacy is that would be good for customer protection. But we can also see, and maybe it should, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but we can also see that obviously has a commercial impact. It wouldn't hurt the state-owned operator since casino is just a niche product for them, whereas other products that they offer are much more important for them. Whereas for an online casino operator, that's the whole business. And we notice that it's a constant stream of suggestions that verbally is connected to customer protections, but those suggestions always, or at least with 99% likability, has a connection to commercial benefits. So it's always wise to ask yourself, okay, so this customer protection suggestion, what's the commercial impact for that? Could it perhaps be linked to some kind of benefit for the one who suggested that customer protection regulation? And in 99% of the cases, it's always like that.
Okay, so it seems very much that the state-run operator Svenska Spel, they kind of get their way, so to say. It seems a little bit that the other licensed operators are discriminated against in comparison to Svenska Spel. But doesn't this lead back to the original reason why Sweden was being sued on European level? Was the fact that Svenska Spel was not there to protect the player. They were there to make a profit, and that's why Sweden was threatened to be sued on European level. So my question is then, if this is now kind of repeating itself, even though the licensing system is in place, is there anything that can be done on European level?
Perhaps, but to me, it's quite obvious that the European Commission doesn't prioritize gambling law at the moment, and the European Union has its own problems at the moment. So unfortunately, I believe that well, perhaps they can achieve something, but I can't say that I'm super impressed about the rule of law when it comes to EU law. I believe that we have to fight locally in our own jurisdiction as well. We've seen a number of cases, infringements of both EU law and national law when it comes to competition law and regulations regarding EU notifications, etc., etc. But to be honest, it's quite difficult to convince the EU Commission to take action.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, we are in a tricky situation right now with the Swedish market. The regulator is very strict. They have other intentions in mind and potentially what is best for the consumer, and it's a very tricky situation for the license operators. How do you see this playing out, Gustaf? What can be done? Like, how do you turn this around?
Well, at the end of the day, I believe in facts, and we will very soon present numbers of how large, or rather how small, the channelization will be should the government decide to proceed with their suggestions. And it will be clear for each and everyone, including the government, that if they decide to proceed, then it will be the end of the licensing system, at least when it comes to online casino. And I believe that even if you are a government, and even if you are sometimes slightly populistic, you have to listen to what is actually going on, because we are all losers should the licensing system fail. One should also bear in mind that the Swedish re-regulation is not only created by the Swedish government. It was in fact something created by all the political parties in the parliament, in the Riksdagen, except the left-wing party. So the parliament, it has 8 parties, and 7 out of those parties voted for this re-regulation of the gambling market. And I am aware that the opposition parties right now are feeling quite frustrated about the fact that the government is acting without listening to the parliament. We have a minority government in Sweden, and they are every day in the need of political support from other political parties in the parliament. And I believe that if political parties, as well as the industry, as well as the academic world, universities, etc., also gambling addicts associations, etc., if they all, and that is actually what is going on right now in Sweden, if they all point to the problem that, hey, we are in fact threatening the licensing system now with these additional measures, then I believe that we have a chance of not just saving the licensing system, but also to convince and to create an environment that should make it possible for the government to understand that it's important to create something that is market friendly. And market friendly it's not the same thing as not caring about customer protection. It's actually quite the opposite. It's absolutely possible to create a regulation that protects the customer's rights and protects the needs of problem gamblers, and at the same time gains a high channelization.
Yeah, it's all about, I mean, it goes back to the question, like you said, to make them understand that it's in their own political interest. Let's say to play, let's play ball on their playing field, so to say, is that it's not just about what is best for the consumer and the channelization and the tax revenue that comes in. It is also on the political level, what scores, what is best for their individual career, political careers. I mean, and like you're saying, if they understand that this could be the end of the licensing system, that is something that can backfire to them politically, obviously, because if the operators would leave, well, then they don't have that much to do anymore to restrict the operators if they are back on the outside of the licensing system, so to say. So do you think, Gustaf, the minister Ardalan Shekarabi, obviously he's a busy man. He handles not only gambling, other questions as well. Does he understand this deeply? Do he understand what he is doing means long term?
I wish I had a better insight into his brain. I do not know.
I guess so, yeah.
We meet his undersecretary on a regular basis, and at least I believe that the staff around the minister, they understand how hazardous the situation is with the dropping channelization. But perhaps that's not the important thing for the minister, but rather to work with gambling related issues for some time, and then take a further step into his career. And if the licensing system crashes in a year or 2 or 3 years, it may not be that important, or it may not be the main focus for the minister, should he have been able to move to even more important steps in his career. But we try to remind him of the political aspect of this as well, that it may actually backfire on the government's and the minister's career.
Exactly.
But I must also say that a politician has a responsibility, and it feels almost silly to say this, but a politician has a responsibility towards their reality. You cannot give your own political career higher priority compared to actually making things better. And if you sacrifice the licensing system and all the customer protection within the licensing system, for example, the self-exclusion system doesn't work if the punter doesn't gamble within the licensing system. Then you sacrifice a lot for your own political ambition. And I believe that is a wrong path to choose.
So that leads into another question as well, about the quick loans industry, which is also huge in Sweden. If I understand that correctly, the quick loans with kind of very high interest is also a big problem in Sweden. A much bigger problem, I would say, than the gaming industry, which is an entertainment industry in its essence. Why is it that the quick loan industry is not regulated? Why isn't there like a spelpaus, but for this quick credit, like a credit pause, where you can exclude yourself from these quick loans, for example?
That is a brilliant idea, and we have suggested that several times. I don't know why, but we have suggested a self-exclusion.
Is it because it's not that looked down upon in society yet? Just like
yeah, probably. I mean, when it comes to gambling, you have gambling addictions associations, a number of them, and they are of course extremely strong in their advocacy. Whereas I haven't seen an association for quick loan addicts yet. So it's pretty much silent when it comes to this dilemma.
Very strange, isn't it? I mean, the quick loans has been there for a long time as well. I mean, a similar time frame as the online gaming industry, and still it hasn't picked up the same.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that we have suggested to regulate financial institutions in general and the quick loans in particular. We have also highlighted the importance of the B2B licenses, because we noticed that B2B companies still sell their products to unlicensed operators, and we believe that could be an important measure. A B2B license could be an important measure in protecting the licensing system as well.
Yeah, that's another question, right? Because right now, before I go on, I just wanted to give a little shout out to Jonas, who suggested this question in regards to the quick loans. Thank you, Jonas. Really appreciate that. But yes, like you mentioned, the B2B licenses. So right now, it seems that the operators are carrying all the burden. Let's say the affiliates are I'm talking globally now. Like kind of the affiliates are roaming freely. The slot machine producers, the game producers, they have kind of escaped this regulation a little bit as well, and it's kind of business as usual. What role do they play in all of this?
Well, let me start with saying that many B2B companies have voluntarily decided to not offer their products to unlicensed operators, regardless of the legislation. So they are in fact taking a big responsibility, a responsibility that is not taken by the state.
Is that a pure ethical decision from them, or do they have any kind of? Is there anything behind that as well?
I can imagine that they also receive pressure from licensed operators that it's not offering a level playing field should they sell their products to the black market. And after all, the licensed market is larger than the black market. So it's likely that they receive a lot of pressure from the licensed operators as well. But I do believe that this could be functioning. But what I really want to stress is when we talk about all those repressive measures, there are a lot of suggestions, maybe IP blocking, maybe payment blocking, maybe blocking of this and that.
Kind of like what Norway are doing. Is that correct?
Exactly. Right? And Norway is actually a brilliant example of my point here.
Yeah.
And my point is that you can never build up a successful licensing system being repressive. The only way to be successful is that you actually allow the licensed operators to offer attractive offers within the licensing system. Norway, as you mentioned, they've been trying to build up several walls for their own legal jurisdiction, but it just doesn't work. So the message to
why doesn't it work? If you may explain. So they are trying to block. Addresses. They're trying to block credit suppliers and stuff. Why is that not working?
Because there will always be an attractive offer from an unlicensed operator only a few seconds away from your computer or from your smartphone. And the punters know this. And they will find paths that are going around any kind of regulation that tries to stop them. This message may sound a bit pessimistic, but one shall bear in mind that it is absolutely possible to reach a high channelization if you allow the licensed operators to offer popular gambling within the licensing system. I believe that's the reason why the UK has a 95% channelization, that they actually, at least historically, allowed the punters the operators to offer attractive offers to the punters. I understand this is difficult for any kind of legislator to balance, because on one hand, you want a super strict customer protection, but on the other hand, you also have to offer the punters an attractive gambling environment. And the tricky thing for any legislator is to find a balance between those two entities. And that's at least for the moment, the big failure in Sweden, that the restriction has gone too far. And when the restrictions are going too far, you actually lose also when it comes to customer protection. So you have to accept a certain degree of attractiveness in the licensing system to actually protect and obtain a high channelization. Channelization is not a customer protection measure in itself, but it's the fundament. Channelization is the fundament of every customer protection measure, because if the punters are not there, you won't reach them with your fantastic customer protection tools.
Yeah, it's a great comment, Gustaf, and I guess you can summarize it kind of in a way that yes, you need to find that balance between customer protection and the attractive offers for them to stay within the licensing system, but also then to balance that against the public opinion, as from the politicians' point of view, and how can they implement these measures, especially in the situation Sweden are in now, to kind of allow gambling to increase. And so for you as BOS, how do you what changes would you lobby for at the moment? How do you see?
At the moment, we are lobbying for a withdrawal of the latest suggested measures from the government. Last Friday, the government suggested a deposit limit of 5,000 Swedish krona, a weekly deposit limit, and it is targeting online casino only. There is also a more restrictive bonus regulation that we also target at the moment. So we are not so we are quite focusing now at the moment on what is going on right now, right here, and that is what we are focusing on. And our main advocacy is that we have shown, we have found scientifically based numbers that the channelization will go down to almost 50% should the government continue with those measures. And we hope that the government will listen to that argument.
How have you come to that conclusion of that the channelization to 50%, if I may ask? So this is very similar to what it was before the regulation.
We have asked an independent consultancy firm to do the math, and they have come to that conclusion. It's not exactly 50%, but slightly above 50%.
Okay, interesting. So that's a huge drop from where we are now. When you are talking about kind of like 80%, where we are now at 75% or something like that, and that will naturally mean a huge cut into the revenue of the licensed operators right now, especially those who have Sweden as their main market.
Yes, I just want to stress that this is only regarding online casino, whereas trotting and sports betting, etc., will have higher channelization numbers, regardless of what the government does or doesn't.
Yeah, but it still seems to me that with these stricter measures, that this could be kind of what tips the scale for some operators to even leave the market should the government go through with these changes, or?
Yes, I agree. And from a governmental point of view, that would cause some problems should some operators leave. But they should be more concerned about lost customer protection, since the punters are elsewhere, and to some extent that they also are losing tax income. If half the market is somewhere else, you also lose income from tax income. And during these hard times, I have met few governments that are not interested in gaining tax.
Yeah, interesting. So we're running out of time, Gustaf. It's really interesting to hear your opinions on where Sweden is going in general. So I have one last question for you. So let's say now, Gustaf, you go into politics, and all of a sudden you are the replacement of Ardalan Shekarabi. Tomorrow you go into the government, and now you are in charge. What will be your agenda?
I would begin with creating a level playing field. And I believe it's super important that the state is the referee. The state shall not be suspected of doing anything out of the interest of the whole nation. And with that belief, I believe it is impossible to be the referee and at the same time an aggressive player on the commercial market. So my first step would probably be to privatize the state-owned operator Svenska Spel, because I simply believe that the state has a unique task, and that is to set the regulations and to be a tough judge when operators are infringing those regulations. But as it stands right now, the state is not just a judge, not just a referee, but it is in fact a player in the same game. And it's extremely difficult in such environment to create a level playing field. So I think that would be my very first step.
So yeah, actually, I'm going to lead up with another question following that. So this is very much the strategy that the right-wing party had when they took government in 2008 to privatize some of the state-owned industries. For example, the pharmacy was a monopoly. It turned out not to be a monopoly anymore. Do you think that if the right-wing government would take over in the next election, well, one, would they be a lot more easier to work with? And two, do you think that they would consider to sell off Svenska Spel?
They would probably consider it, but that's not the same thing as saying that they would do something. One shall remember that we've had a couple of center right-wing governments in Sweden, but none of those governments took any initiative to abandon the monopoly, but rather they did their best to protect the monopoly. So I may have been harsh against this government and Ardalan Shekarabi, but one shall applaud him for the fact that he actually took the initiative to introduce the licensing system. Mm. But we can of course remember that a decade ago, Sweden was one of the largest liquor producers in the world, because the state of Sweden owned the quite famous brand Absolut Vodka. And it was a center right-wing government in Sweden that decided that, well, maybe producing alcohol is not the core business of a government. So they took this initiative to sell AB Vin & Sprit, the parental company of Absolut Vodka, to French liquor producer Pernod Ricard. And yes, I believe that the likability of an initiative like the one that the center right-wing government took a decade ago to sell Absolut Vodka, the likability is probably higher that such initiative will be taken by a center right-wing company compared to a social democratic government.
Great, Gustaf. Thank you so much. We will close on that note, so that when next time you open a bottle of Absolut Vodka, the most Swedish vodka in the world, it's not Swedish anymore, basically.
It's made in southern Sweden. I just want to stress that. So it's still made of wheat from southern Sweden, but it's actually owned by the French. And I like the French, so it's quite all right.
Fair enough. Gustaf, thank you so much for coming on today. It's really interesting to listen to, and I'm sure that there's a lot more to come in this discussion. And should the situation develop, I'd love to hear a follow-up on this as well. But for now, I wish you a great day, and also thank you to everyone who tuned in. So yeah, take care, Gustaf, and I hope to see you soon.
Hope to see you soon as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.